In 1973, Jack and Janet Smurl moved into what seemed like the perfect home in the peaceful neighborhood of West Pittston, Pennsylvania. The duplex offered space, calm, and the promise of a fresh start for their growing family. Sharing the home with Jack's parents, the Smurls settled into daily life with optimism and routine. But as the sun set on that first evening, an unsettling stillness crept through the walls, a silence that felt heavier than it should. The family had no idea their new beginning was the continuation of something much older, and much darker. This was no ordinary home. And for the Smurls, the nightmare was just beginning. It began subtly. Low thuds in the walls, the sound of footsteps where no one walked, and a persistent cold draft that drifted through the upstairs hallway. Jack and Janet brushed it off as the quirks of an old house, perhaps the settling of wood or the wind outside. But the sounds grew louder, more deliberate, dragging noises from the attic, knocking patterns in threes, and whispers that stopped abruptly when they listened closely. These weren't the harmless creaks of an aging home, this felt like something trying to make itself known. And it was just the beginning of a series of disturbances that would soon spiral out of control. Soon after the sounds began, an unbearable stench filled the home. It was thick, acidic, like rotting flesh mixed with sulfur, and no amount of cleaning or open windows could chase it away. It would appear suddenly, choking the air, and vanish just as quickly. The Smurls called in plumbers and electricians, but no source could be found. It wasn't just a smell, it felt alive, malicious, a presence announcing itself without ever showing a face. And then, just as the family began to adapt to one horror, another would rise, darker, more personal, and far more dangerous. The disturbances escalated quickly. Lights began to flicker without cause, appliances turned on and off at random, and the television often changed channels by itself, sometimes landing on static, accompanied by distant, garbled voices. The family called electricians, who found no faults in the wiring. But the phenomena only intensified, as if the house itself was reacting with anger. One night, the entire home went dark, and in the silence that followed, the Smurls heard it again, scraping, breathing, and something whispering their names. The house was no longer just haunted, it was under siege. Then came the figure. Late one night, Janet Smurl was walking down the hallway when she saw it, standing still at the far end. It wasn't a person, but it wasn't entirely shapeless either. A dark, looming form with the faint suggestion of limbs, and eyes that glowed a deep, unnatural red. As she stared, paralyzed by fear, the figure silently faded into the shadows. It wasn't a trick of the light or a fleeting dream. She knew what she saw. And worse, it knew she saw it too. From that moment on, the Smurls were no longer just hearing things. They were being watched. Jack was the first to be physically attacked. One morning, as he stepped out of the shower, he felt a sudden, burning pain down his back, as if claws had raked across his skin. Rushing to the mirror, he found 3 long, red scratches, bleeding slightly, yet no one had been near him. The attacks didn't stop there. Doors slammed without cause, objects were thrown, and unseen hands would grab, pull, or shove family members. What was once an unseen presence had become violently real. And it was no longer just trying to scare them. It wanted control, and it was getting stronger. The haunting took a darker, more terrifying turn when Janet began to experience blackouts, hours lost, with no memory of what she'd done. But it wasn't just forgetfulness. Jack reported seeing her speak in strange voices, uttering words in languages they didn't understand. Once, he even claimed she levitated briefly above their bed, her face contorted as if in agony. The children were terrified. Whatever entity had entered their home was no longer satisfied with noises and scratches. It wanted to take over, to invade the very people who lived there. And Janet was the first to be targeted. The children, once shielded from the worst of the activity, began to suffer. They spoke of a man in the closet, tall, silent, and always watching. Toys moved on their own, music boxes played haunting melodies in the dead of night, and cold spots followed them from room to room. One of the girls even claimed she heard growling from beneath her bed, and once, she woke to find claw marks on her blanket. The Smurl parents could no longer pretend their children were safe. The haunting wasn't just tormenting the adults, it was reaching into the innocent corners of the home, corrupting what was supposed to be a place of safety and warmth. Desperate for peace, the Smurls turned to the church. A priest visited the home, walking room to room, blessing the walls with holy water and reciting prayers. But instead of calm, the house responded with fury. Crucifixes fell from the walls, furniture shook violently, and a deep, guttural growl echoed from the basement. The priest left shaken and uncertain. He promised to report the case to higher authorities, but warned the Smurls, this wasn't a simple haunting. Whatever plagued their home had deep roots. And it would not leave quietly. It was as if the very act of blessing had only awakened something darker. The Smurl family, once united, began to fracture under the pressure of the relentless haunting. The fear was palpable. Jack and Janet were both physically and emotionally drained, the children now too terrified to sleep alone. They had lost their peace, their safety, and their will to continue living in a place that no longer felt like home. The terrifying events continued, objects moved, walls bled, and the whispers grew louder. The family was on the edge, and as they stood together in the living room one final night, they realized that something had to change. But what could they do when it seemed like the very house itself was alive, a malevolent force that refused to let them go? Word of the Smurls' suffering reached Ed and Lorraine Warren, renowned demonologists known for investigating some of the darkest hauntings in modern history. When they arrived, Lorraine immediately sensed the presence of something powerful and evil. She described it as inhuman, a demonic entity that fed on fear and pain. Ed began conducting prayers and documenting evidence while Lorraine walked the home, eyes half closed, whispering to unseen forces. The Warrens believed this was not just a ghost, but a demonic infestation, a force that would need more than blessings to be removed. For the Smurls, the arrival of the Warrens offered a glimmer of hope, but also confirmed their greatest fear: the nightmare was real, and it was far from over. During their investigation, the Warrens captured chilling evidence. Ed recorded unexplained growls, chilling moans, and even voices taunting the family in a language they couldn't understand. Lorraine saw visions of past tragedies within the house, sensing pain and torment etched into its very walls. Photographs revealed orbs, strange blurs, and one particularly disturbing image of a shadowy figure standing behind Janet, when no one else had been in the room. The deeper they dug, the more apparent it became, this was no ordinary haunting. The Smurl home was under siege by something ancient, malevolent, and relentless. And despite their decades of experience, even the Warrens admitted, this case was among the darkest they'd ever faced. Then came the night the demon made its most terrifying move: possession. Jack Smurl began acting strangely, forgetting stretches of time, speaking in voices that weren't his own. One evening, he collapsed, his body twisting unnaturally, his eyes rolling back. The Warrens, present at the time, knew the signs. Ed held a crucifix over Jack, reciting prayers while Lorraine called out to the entity. Jack convulsed violently, the lights in the room flickering as an invisible force filled the space with an unbearable weight. For the family, it was no longer about haunted rooms or objects, it was about survival. The thing inside their home had now invaded the body of a father, a husband, and it wasn't letting go. With the situation escalating, the Warrens secured help from the Catholic Church. A priest, trained in exorcism, was dispatched to the Smurl home. That night, the house felt more like a battlefield than a residence. Candles flickered wildly, objects levitated, and an invisible force pushed back against every holy word spoken. The priest, undeterred, pressed on, chanting prayers in Latin, splashing holy water across the walls and doorways. Screeches and howls, unlike anything human, erupted from deep within the home. Then, silence. For a brief moment, it felt like the nightmare had ended. But the Smurls would soon learn that darkness does not leave quietly. The entity had been weakened, but not destroyed. Eventually, the Smurl family could take no more. In 1989, they left the house for good, hoping to escape the entity that had nearly destroyed them. The hauntings reportedly ceased once they moved, suggesting that the evil had been bound to the location itself. To this day, no one knows exactly what haunted the Smurl home. Was it a demon? A tormented soul? Or something far worse? What's certain is that the terror they endured remains one of the most chilling documented hauntings in American history. And the echoes of what happened there may still linger in the shadows. This was a true story. For more terrifying true paranormal cases like this, subscribe to Only True Horror. And remember, the full story and sources are linked in the description below. Darkness is real, and sometimes, it lives next door.